Hi. Well, my wife set me a very interesting challenge a couple of days ago. She said, try to talk about your topic without showing much numbers and graphs. So that's very difficult for me because I'm both a system dynamicist and a decision scientist. So I took the challenge and decided to speak about mythology instead of artificial intelligence. The idea behind it is basically, I don't know if you've heard this quote from Arthur C. Clarke, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I think we're reaching a point where we have to, if we want to imagine the future, start talking about magic and not technology. Let's get into it. A little bit of context about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is the science of intelligent programs. What intelligent means basically programs that are able to become better as they are being used, which means more accurate and more efficient. We're hearing a lot of talk about this in both media, on stages like these nowadays, and many of you may be asking yourselves why, or if not, at least I did recently. One of the important factors is that this is a critical uncertainty. It's something that is so important but so poorly understood that everyone is pretty much anxious about it. Let me look at technology in general. Technology tends to develop in waves. These waves sometimes we call megacycles. They usually overlap, but the gist is the following. Every 50 years or so, we have to completely reinvent our society, our organizational structures, our skill sets, everything that we do. We need to change and adapt. It happened before with information technology, where we built our networks and connectivity. We spoke about this. It started off with awkward big machines that are now big computer systems in our pockets. It happened again as well before that with petrochemicals and automobiles. What's different this time is that every single aspect on both sides of the equation is virtual. It's not tangible. The revolution is driven by accessible data analyzed by increasingly affordable and capable computing power, transferred from one place to another through the communications infrastructure that we built. So the fundamental change, what the next revolution is about, is basically predictions. Prediction power is becoming cheap and ubiquitously available. And this is going to change everything. We live in a day where an international community of people who may not even know each other build software through open source technologies using data from everywhere, including smart hardware that is currently starting to occupy our homes and offices, increasingly so. That's being analyzed by intelligent software through cheap computing power in the cloud or on-premise. And this is amazing. This is starting to become very similar to magic, as I said. Let's look at where AI is right now before we try to project into the future. Rod Brooks said that with 50 years of progress, where we're standing today, and that's from 6 months ago, I think, is that our artificial intelligence systems have the visual object recognition capabilities of a 2-year-old child, the dexterity of a 6-year-old, and the communication and language skills of a 10-year-old. I slightly disagree about the last one, but we'll see why. This is the only graph that I put. What it shows is how rapidly, within the last 4 to 5 years, our capabilities in recognizing key entities within an image have increased, the capabilities of our algorithms. This is, on the left side, you can see error rate, and the red line represents the average human capability. With deep learning, our algorithms right now are better than humans within that specific task field. And this is becoming the norm in many different fields, like, for example, understanding English sentences, playing rule-based games, writing computer programs even, transcribing voice, and analyzing text and translating it. Here's, for example, how well AI does with images. This is numerous examples where key entities are being recognized within random photos. Here, we can see where it gets it wrong. The moment you change the view perspective, for example, it can't recognize the cherries, but it sees the Dalmatian. We all know how it went with the top Go players, and we all know how it went with chess. And recently, and this is way under human capabilities, of course, but it's starting to develop. Recently, AI was developed that, given the rules of the Hearthstone game, if provided with an image of a card, it can automatically write the code necessary to play this card and interact within the game. Silly, but quite exciting. Now, of course, there are limitations. So within visual recognition, for example, with targeted distortion that's very small, indistinguishable for the human eye, we can confuse an algorithm. Furthermore, if we expect our machines to learn from the average human interaction, things may go a little awkward. Like, for example, this is Tai. It was a Microsoft-developed chatbot that was released to Twitter last year. It went so offensive and racist that it had to be shut down. And this is a lesson that we may not want to learn from the average human dweller of the social media space. AI currently is struggling with small changes in input. So for example, if I invert the colors in an image, it gets confused. Extracting or deriving causal structures, you give it data, it does correlations. It can't really figure out what the relationships between entities, especially if they go through several layers of abstractions are. Transfer learning, try to transfer conclusions from one domain to another, it gets confused. But also reasoning ethically. And that last one is very important because of the complexity of ethics, as well as many more things. But what we need to understand is that this is 50 years, and most of the progress has been made in the last 5. Now try to think 10, 20, 30 years into the future. As I said, the next cycle is going to play out in the next 30 to 50 years. And this is where things become weird. So in order to convince myself, or in order to imagine the future, I said, well, let's completely depart from whatever examples we have and use mythology and magic as an inspiration. But first, the future, we've been trying to second guess the future for a long time, and usually we're pretty poor at that, because the future is a foreign country. They do things differently there. And I dare to say also they have different motives for doing things differently. This is French artists trying to imagine the future in 1910. So interestingly enough, they did, this is a primitive Roomba, for example. And this is how they thought that we're going to learn in class. They didn't get it completely wrong. Of course, it's awkward, it's rudimentary, it doesn't use the technological capabilities we have right now when people were imagining the year 2000. But they got a couple of things right. The first thing that I think they got right is this. Our basic needs did not change. They rarely do. And the fact is that if we want to predict what technology is going to do for us, we really need to think about what we're going to need. The second thing, which is really important to me, is that, in fact, there is one fundamental thing that's been driving human progress throughout the ages, and I think we often don't talk about it. We always want more with less. We want to travel to more places, but spend less time. We want to earn more, but work less. We want to achieve more with less effort. And this is what technology progress, I think, is about. And the thing is that if we take this statement to the extremes, we want everything with nothing. And here is where my magic metaphor starts making sense. Because this is what magic is. Getting everything at nearly zero cost. So of course, mythology is the first and best source of inspiration for magic. So let's try to dive in and imagine the world of mythology through the eyes of a dweller in the past and explain the inexplicable. Imagine that we take someone from the 1500s and bring him over to 2020. How are we going to explain the technology that we have? Maybe by using something that these people can relate to. And one of the things that I actually get very inspired by is that stories that persisted over time will tend to persist furthermore. The narratives that we've had in the past will survive a little longer because that's what drives survivability of narratives. So I'll try to use the narratives of crystal balls, genies, and deities to display 3 different scenarios of artificial intelligence. Let's look at crystal balls. They're enchanted, intelligent devices, mirrors, orbs, cups, phones that can be used for scrying. They're all-knowing, all-seeing. They allow us to peek into the future. Of course, we need to interpret that future. And they answer questions. Whatever question you want, you ask, and you should get an answer. Sounds like Google, doesn't it? On the left side are the questions that we currently ask Google, or at least the way we phrase them. And on the right side is the questions that we might start asking platforms like Google. And the interesting thing is that not only will Google will become more accurate in answering the questions on the left side, but it will explore opportunities in speculation. There are many other platforms which we can ask for questions right now. And there's also platforms that enable us to look into the lives of our friends and foes and see what their lives are about, pretty much like the magic mirror. The opportunities are immense, of course. The quality of our decisions, informed by near-perfect information, will definitely improve. Furthermore, being able to simulate realities, combine artificial intelligence with virtual reality, for example, we'll be able to get instant feedback of the consequences of our actions and learn from that. There is a big richness in this into improving human decision-making, especially in the intergenerational terms, which is something that historically we really suck at. Communication, it's the ultimate communication device, even when it comes to communicating with the past versions of ourselves or with dead people. And you may laugh at this, but imagine the digital trace that you live, all the data, all your interactions, all your searches, photos, all of this, projected into a virtual image of yourself empowered by AI. Talk about transcendence, huh? Of course, magic always comes at a price. There are threats to this. The information that we get or the suggestions that we get are open to interpretation because perfect information does not equal perfect understanding. There's an over-reliance issue as well. I don't know how many of you have gotten in trouble by blindly following their GPS, but I know my wife definitely does that. There's an arrogance component because we, thinking that we have perfect information, will very often not only take the wrong decisions, but will also take the wrong decisions at scale. And this is really bad. And privacy, truth, that becomes really complicated. So here's an example just to make a point. This is from a couple of years ago. The guy drove his car off a bridge because the bridge wasn't finished yet and the GPS didn't really know about that. And how about this? This is from just a few days ago. Someone, a researcher, took images and videos of Obama from speeches and was able to reconstruct an AI that would behave and perform like the ex-president and seem real. Someone else also was taking voice samples from Trump and modeling speeches. Talk about fake news. This takes it to another dimension. Okay. The drivers, very quickly, of course, the more we use this technology, the more data we provide it, the better it becomes. Integration, the more we integrate different systems, the more data we provide, the better it becomes. Processing power, the cheaper, the more available it becomes, the better it becomes, the more easily we can. ETL means extraction, transformation, labeling of data, which is preparing it for analysis, basically. The more prediction models we'll be able to run at scale, and talent. We think that we're going to displace people with machines, but someone needs to build all that stuff, right? So let's take it a little bit further. Crystal balls cannot really project themselves into the real world, right? They're scrying orbs. You can just ask them questions. But genies, they can do a lot of stuff. They're like personal assistants from another dimension. They grant wishes and execute tasks at zero cost, frictionless in this case. And they're obliged to do so. They're bound to a device or a location, and they're sworn to serve their master. Think of this as authentication. Here's an example of a genie that currently runs tasks for me. This is a very simple one. But there is even more complicated ones. This is the Tesla factory. This is not tomorrow. This is today. And this is a Chinese postage company. This is basically little robots sorting packages and pushing them through the right holes. This is a robot that can construct houses in less than 2 days. And this is your future driver, depending on how well we figure out the legislation around it. The thing is that not only physical tasks are being automated, as we spoke about it. I'm not going to get into detail. Robot advisory is on the way. There's a lot of potential opportunity there. And the opportunities are obvious. Productivity for first. We can get a lot more work done if we have genies to help us out. There's a cost to learning which is reduced because once one machine knows something, it can share it. It's much easier and less frictionless and less, and involves less friction than human learning, for example. Access, on the positive side, the more we lower the cost of services and products, the more people will have access to it, which is great because machines do that. And human safety. there are certain tasks that are basically not really safe for humans right now, so we better send robots there. This is curiosity too. The threats are also dialed up because there is a serious problem of agency. If my autonomous vehicle hits a person, who is responsible? Security. What if a genie gets stolen or hacked? You know, what if someone stole Aladdin's lamp and used it maliciously? And what happens if, for example, we decide to roll out autonomous vehicles at scale and they get weaponized? Inequality. Even if we do not intend this, technology does give an unfair advantage to the people who have it. And we, as the people who are basically at the top part of society in terms of what we can afford, may feel very comfortable with that, but most of us don't. So what happens? Because when I have a genie, I am less tired, I am better rested, I am more well-fed, I can do more stuff, which means I'm automatically in a competitive advantage position to everyone else. And we really need to think about that. And then purpose, of course, which is something that gets discussed a lot, because if genies do all the work, what are we gonna do? The drivers, localized processing power, batteries, progress in voice and image recognition, I'm not gonna spend too much time on that. But ethics is one that we should spend some time on. Because the fact is that we need to figure out first control and then ethics before we roll out machines in our society at scale. Now, this one is a little uncomfortable because I'm not necessarily a singularity believer, but I am a believer in complex dynamic systems. So let's talk about deities. They are infinite transcendent beings that lord over humanity. They have excellence in some aspects and weakness in other, but the important part is they are free-willed. This is machines with free will that we're trying to use as a metaphor for. Now, the opportunities there are a few. To be honest, I struggled on this one. One thing is our gods of the future may just be augmented human beings that are benevolent, which means that they will take care of us. The second thing is any superhuman strength can protect us from things like, for example, asteroids or our worst enemies. On the other side, also, this creates a competitive environment where people go into an AI arms race. This is really projecting far, by the way, so if it becomes a little weird, don't worry about it. The threats are control. Deities act on their own intent. Now, one of the things that I want to argue is that it's not necessarily that we build self-conscious machine that is a threat. The threat is that complex dynamic systems that are interconnected tend to have emerging behavior. And emerging behavior, which we don't understand, we tend to attribute superhuman powers to. So for the masses, there is literally no difference than a very powerful machine that has some level of autonomy and a god. And then complexity, of course. People see intent in randomness. Oftentimes, for example, I dare to say that our economy was the first superhuman power that we created. It's intertwined. We don't really control it. Interesting. And then distraction. While we're talking about deities, we're not really doing the real fundamental work, which is building legislation, building a proper understanding of how to interact with machines. The drivers, primarily our imagination and some bad math in the sense of basically emergent behavior, but also insufficient understanding of how complex dynamic systems work and acting faster than that understanding. So let's get back to reality for a little bit. A lot of people have been wondering if our AI overlords will take over the world in the next 50 years, and what do they want from us if they do? To which first I laugh and then I say, software doesn't really want anything yet. Our machines are driven by complex mathematics, but our decisions are mostly driven by simple rationality. If my cost of personnel is higher than my technology cost, I will move towards technology. So people are being displaced not by machines, but by innovation. And I think we should not talk about an industrial revolution or machines displacing human beings, because it's humans taking these decisions as a society, as individuals. So the things that I'm personally worried about and topics that I would like to discuss is first, safety and security. What happens to privacy and truth where we have so much data laying around and suddenly we have algorithms that can pick it up and make sense of it? Even data that can be analyzed and deliver conclusions through proxy. by which I mean that even if we think we're not exposing ourselves, we may be, because someone can tie the knots together. One of the previous speakers raised a very interesting question. What if my child gets a psychological profile based on data that I've published? I don't think about that every single time I commit a data point, but I keep doing it. Centralizations. Analytics requires data to go through one place. Data going through one place, centralized systems provide a single point of failure, a single point of attack. And then rushing in. I think that jumping in, creating an arms race, and the reason why I'm talking about an AI arms race is because we don't talk about people and our society as a whole developing artificial intelligence. We talk about China investing in artificial intelligence, the United States investing in artificial intelligence, independent parties almost competing with each other because the first one to reach Holy Grail is going to be dominating. And the fact is that in that competition, we may be missing the mark on some things that are very important, like, for example, ethics, or what could the unintended consequences be. Explanation and interpretability. As I said, I've been dealing with mathematical modeling a lot. And the thing about models is that they're biased, always. But mostly, the more complex they become, and especially if they're statistical, they're difficult to backtrack. Not because it's impossible, but because it takes a lot of effort and you have to look at the data. Manipulation. I showed you a few adversarial examples of how neural networks can be cheated, in a sense, with targeted distortion. Imagine what the implications to security for that could be if our security also relies entirely on artificial intelligence. And education. I think we don't spend enough educating ourselves about complexity. I think that our education systems have been built for the industrial economy, and part of the problem with that is that that makes people specialize. And part of the problem with people specializing is that they're focused on solving problems within their domain. But what happens now is that complexity is exponential and people need to think laterally. And last but not least, fairness and de-biasing. We're embedding assumptions in models which will take decisions for us. I don't want my child to have a credit score determined by a machine based on data that I've committed about her today on Facebook. We need to be able to be transparent about the assumptions that we embed in order to be able to analyze them. But part of the problem with that is that who is to do the auditing as complexity is exponential? Arrogance. Bad data equals bad decisions. Most of our data is collected through proxy. There is a risk there. And linear thinking, because very often bad decisions lead to good outcomes just because this is how complex systems work. The outcomes, the feedback does not emerge in the same time and in the same place. And the implication of this is that, I did something bad, nothing bad happened. This is fine. This is a good data point. But bad decisions plus good outcomes equals bad data. And bad data put in a model equals bad decisions. And a little bit of game theory about, even if we talk on conferences about ethics and about making AI human-friendly and etc., this doesn't really move the mark. Because the fact is that game theory taught us, as long as there is a significant incentive for cheating and lower risk of being caught, people will cheat. Which means that if my AI is better because it doesn't adhere to all your ethical standards, I will probably try to do that, to deploy it, as long as there's a less chance to get caught. So what I'm trying to say is this. Governance and regulatory structures need to be proactive. They need to not only catch up, but they need to leapfrog. Because the fact is that as long as technology moves faster, we're in some level of trouble because we don't know how this is going to affect us. And this is from someone who is actually pro-technology. I've been participating in teams building digital products for the last 12 years, sorry. And the last thing, smart systems interact for us, not with us. And that's a problem because for most of us, the AI revolution is going to be invisible. It's going to happen, and they will not have a say on it. Thank you.